What happens when a quiet, retired ranger saves a wounded puma in the middle of nowhere, only to find himself stalked, threatened, and watched by more than just wild eyes? What she does next flips everything upside down. I wasn't planning on saving anyone that morning. I was planning on coffee, maybe fixing the busted hinge on my shed. You know, normal, retired forest ranger kind of stuff. But when you live tucked into the Blue Ridge, the forest has a nasty habit of throwing its own plans at you. It started with silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful. It feels off. The birds had shut up. Even the squirrels, those noisy little jerks, had gone mute. That's when I saw the blood. It wasn't a crime scene, not in the usual sense. It was worse, older, dried blood on pine needles, tracked in a lazy zigzag like something dragging itself. I followed it, because curiosity kills more than cats. I expected a deer, maybe a coyote. I did not expect amber eyes staring through a snarl of brambles at me. A young puma, female. She looked like she'd been chewed up and spit out by the worst week of her life. One front paw was caught in an old rusted trap, illegal, brutal, forgotten by some idiot who shouldn't own a license to breathe, much less to hunt. Her breathing was shallow, her ribs too visible, and her eyes. They weren't wild. They were tired, angry, not at me, at everything. Now, let's get this straight. Approaching a wild cat with its leg in a trap is how people end up on the news. But I'd spent 20 years in these woods, and if I knew one thing, it's that fear and pain make animals act a lot like people. Desperate, cornered, dangerous. So yeah, I moved slow. Hands up, voice low, heart somewhere around my throat. "I'm not here to hurt you," I muttered, mostly to calm my own nerves. "But I'm guessing the guy who left that thing wasn't your favorite either." She didn't flinch. She didn't growl. She just watched. I kneeled next to the trap like it was a live snake. My hands were shaking, not out of fear of her, but because I knew how this usually ended. The metal was old and jammed. Took me 3 tries and a whole lot of muttered frustration to get the damn thing to release. When it finally snapped open, the puma didn't bolt. She just stared, like she was waiting for me to do something else, something worse. Instead, I backed off and gave her space. She stood, limped, bloodied paw held up like a forgotten promise. And then, get this, she just left. Not a roar, not a snarl, not even a backward glance, just vanished into the brush like I was yesterday's news. I sat there in the dirt longer than I'd admit to anyone. Felt like the forest was staring back at me through her eyes, judging me, like I was part of the same world that let her get trapped in the first place. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I thought she'd come back, but because something about the whole thing felt wrong. Office. Like I'd stepped into a story that wasn't mine to tell. But the forest wasn't done with me. The next morning, I checked my perimeter cameras. You know, the ones I set up after those developers started sniffing around the hills last year, claiming they wanted to preserve nature by bulldozing it into luxury cabins. One of my cameras had been rotated, deliberately. It wasn't broken, just turned to face my cabin. Let that sit for a second. A predator didn't do that. A prankster kid didn't either. That's the kind of thing someone or something does to send a message. And call me paranoid, but when you've spent your life watching animal trails and human tracks, you know when you're being watched back. Later that day, I found something on my porch. A deer. Not roadkill, not hunted. Placed, like a thank you, or a warning, depending on who or what left it. My gut said both. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this story unfolds. You ever get the feeling something's watching you, not like a nosy neighbor behind their curtain, but deeper, heavier, like the trees themselves are holding their breath? That was my Tuesday morning. After the deer carcass mysteriously showed up on my porch, I figured I'd seen it all. Turns out the forest was just getting warmed up. I'd spent my life understanding animals, reading tracks, figuring out who passed through and why. But this wasn't normal behavior. It was something else, something with intent. I decided to hike deeper into the woods, to the ridge where the land folds like an old blanket. I hadn't been out that far since the state shut down patrol funding. You know how it goes. There's always money for new highways, never for wildlife protection. Halfway there, I noticed more traps. Not one, not two, 6, all rusted, half-buried, and completely illegal. Whoever left them had been busy and careless. It wasn't just animals they were after. Some of the snares were big enough to catch a human leg. Let me tell you something. I've dealt with poachers before. The amateur ones are loud and dumb. The professionals, they're ghosts. But this was personal. The traps were set on marked state property, the kind of land where permits are sacred and trespassing is supposed to mean jail time. But clearly someone figured the rules didn't apply. Well, they picked the wrong woods. I flagged every trap with bright orange cloth and took pictures, lots of them. Then I headed back toward the ranger station to file a formal report. Except when I got there, the lock on the door had been busted, the inside torn apart, files scattered, cameras smashed, and a lovely note written in permanent marker across my old desk. "Go home, old man." Nice. I called the sheriff. Again. This time, I didn't sugarcoat it. "Either you send someone up here who gives a damn," I told him, "or the next time I find one of these traps, I'll assume it's for me." His answer? A half-hearted sigh, followed by something about overwhelmed resources, and maybe you're just reading too much into it. Classic. So I went home, locked my doors, set every motion detector I had, and sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee and a 30-06 across my lap. Not because I wanted trouble, but because I'd already met it. That's when I saw her again. Same Puma, same eyes. Except this time she wasn't limping. She was standing still at the edge of the clearing, staring at me like I owed her something. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched as she turned her head, not at me, but toward the tree line. And then, just like that, she vanished. The next morning, I found a trail. Not made by her, by them. Heavy boots, multiple people. All around my cabin, like they were casing the place. And taped to my front door, a printed flyer. It showed a satellite image of the land around my cabin with thick red lines drawn through it. Labeled Development Project Phase 1. There it was, the reason. This wasn't about poaching. This wasn't even about money. This was about pushing out the last people who still cared about what lives here. And guess what? They weren't just after the animals. This is it, the turning point. What happens next changes everything. Stay here to see how the fight flips, and how one man made them regret picking the wrong forest. They thought I'd roll over, that I'd take their little flyer, fold it up neat and shuffle off like some tired relic of the past. What they didn't count on? I've got more bark than the forest they're trying to bulldoze, and twice the bite. The next night they came back. I heard them before I saw them, boots crunching on frost, too heavy for hunters, too confident for hikers. These weren't lost campers. These were suits in camouflage, and they weren't here to say sorry. But here's the part they didn't expect. I'd already moved my trail cams, the real ones, tucked deep into the trees, wired to a solar panel, motion triggered with night vision. Every step they took lit up my screen like a Christmas tree. And just as one of them crept up toward my front door, something moved behind him. It wasn't me. She came out of the dark like a whisper with teeth, the Puma, the same one I freed. She didn't growl. She didn't leap. She just stood there, muscles coiled, eyes glowing, 10 feet behind a man who didn't even know she was watching him breathe. He turned around. I've seen grown men freeze before. But this? He turned pale, dropped whatever gadget he was holding. And then, like a miracle wrapped in fur and fury, she let out a low rumble that rattled every branch around her. They ran. All of them. One tripped over a tree root and went face first into the mud. Another left behind a fancy GPS unit with his company's logo stamped right on it. A gift, really. I stood there in the dark, watching the last of their headlights disappear over the ridge. No gunfire, no screams, just the sound of justice delivered by 4 paws and a cold stare. Next morning, I got to work. I packaged the footage, every clip, every timestamp, every whisper of them trespassing on protected land, sent it straight to local news, wildlife authorities, and, just for fun, a senator who's made a career pretending to love conservation. Let me tell you, nothing motivates an agency like public embarrassment. Within 48 hours, there were boots on the ground. The legal kind. They found the traps, found the flyer, and found my Puma's footprints right alongside the intruders. Turns out the company never had proper zoning clearance. The development project was a cover for something way murkier: illegal timber, unauthorized fencing, and an environmental study that conveniently got lost. Not anymore. And the cat? She hasn't come back since that night. But every time I walk the edge of the woods, I find her prints. Clean. Precise. Like she's checking in on me the way I once did for her. You know, I never named her. Didn't need to. She wasn't a pet. She wasn't a symbol. She was a reminder. Sometimes the wild doesn't need saving. It needs witnesses who won't look away. They thought I was just some lonely old man with stories no one believed. Now, I'm the reason the forest still has a voice. The forest doesn't forget, and now neither will they.